Hello, friends. We are going to continue with the Tale of Despereaux. Chapter 21, The Queen's Last Words. The Queen loved soup. She loved soup more than anything in the world, except for the Princess P and the King. And because the Queen loved soup, it was served in the castle for every banquet, every lunch, and every dinner. And what soup it was! Cook's love and admiration for the queen and her palate moved the broth that she concocted from the level of pure food to a high art. On this particular day, for this particular banquet, Cook had outdone herself. The soup was a masterwork, a delicate mingling of chicken and watercress and garlic. Roscuro, as he surfaced from the bottom of the queen's bowl, could not help but take a few appreciative sips. "Lovely," he said, distressed for a moment from his misery. "Delightful." "See!" shouted P. "See!" She stood and pointed her finger right at Roscuro. "It is a rat. I told you it was a rat. He was hanging from the chandelier, and now he's in Mama's soup." The musicians stopped playing their guitars. The jugglers stopped juggling. The noble people stopped eating. The queen looked at Roscuro. Roscuro looked at the queen. Readers, in the spirit of honesty, I must utter a difficult and unsavory truth. Rats are not beautiful creatures. They are not even cute. They are really rather nasty beasts, particularly if one happens to appear in your bowl of soup with a piece of watercress dangling from his whiskers. There was a long moment of silence, and then Roscuro said to the queen, "I beg your pardon." In response, the queen flung her spoon in the air and made an incredible noise, a noise that was in no way worthy of a queen, a noise somewhere between the neigh of a horse and the squeal of a pig, and the sounded something like neigh. And then she said, "There's a rat in my soup." The queen was really a simple soul, and always, her whole life, had done nothing except state the overly obvious. She died as she lived. "There is a rat in my soup," was the last word she uttered. She clung to her chest and fell backwards. Her royal chair hit the floor with a thump, and the banquet hall exploded. Spoons were dropped. Chairs were flung back. "Save her!" thundered the king. "You must save her!" All the king's men ran and tried to rescue the queen. Roscuro climbed out of the bowl of soup. He felt that, under these circumstances, it would be best if he left. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the prisoner in the dungeon. His regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left her. So Roscuro turned and he looked back. And he saw that the princess was glaring at him. Her eyes were filled with disgust and anger. "Go back to the dungeon," was what the look she gave him. "Go back to the darkness where you belong." That look, readers, it broke Roscuro's heart. Did you think that rats did not have hearts? Well, you're wrong. All living things have a heart, and the heart of any living thing can be broken. If the rat had not looked over his shoulders, perhaps his heart would have not broken. It is possible, then, I would not have a story to tell you. But readers, he did look. Chapter 22. He puts his heart back together. Roscuro hurried from the banquet hall. "A rat," he said. He put a paw over his heart. "I am a rat. And there is no light for rats, and there will be no light for me." The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was still shouting, "Save her! Save her!" And the queen was still dead, of course, when Roscuro encountered the queen's royal soup spoon lying on the floor. "I will have something beautiful," he said aloud. I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown of my own. He picked up the spoon. He put it on his head. Yes, said Roscuro, I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge. Both things, somehow. There are those hearts, readers, that never mend again once they are broken. Or if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked and lopsided way, as if sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of Roscuro. His heart was broken, picking up the spoon and placing it on his head. Speaking of revenge, these things helped him put his heart back together again. But alas, it was put together wrong. Where's the rat? Shouted the king. Find that rat! If you want me, muttered Roscuro as he left the banquet hall, I'll be in the dungeon, in the darkness. Chapter 23. Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences to Roscuro's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. For instance, the young Roscuro gnawed on the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face. And the match was lit in his face. This set his soul afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, he journeyed upstairs seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess P spotted him and called out the word rat. And because of this, Roscuro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else? You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. For instance, if, readers, you'll just indulge me and allow me to continue with this on consequences, because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all the instruments involved in making and eating soups. Bowls, spoons, and kettles. These things were collected from all the people in the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled into the dungeon. And because Roscuro was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing a rat is that you must first find the rat. And if a rat does not want to be found, readers, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's torturous maze. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the dark heart of the castle. And so the killing of all rats was not a success. And in desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law. All rats are already outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy. But still, the king officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you are the king, you may make up as many ridiculous laws as you'd like. That is what being king is all about. But readers, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen and that without her, he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothe the king's poor heart, and so we must forgive him. And what of these outlawed rats? What of the one outlaw rat in particular? What of Roscuro? What of him? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest, with the spoon atop of his head. He sat to work fashioning himself a kingly cape made out of the scraps of the red tablecloth. And as he worked, one old Botticelli sat next to him, swinging his locket back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth, saying, "See, you see, what comes of the rat going upstairs? I hope you have learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," muttered Roscuro. "Yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me." As Roscuro worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness. In the dank cell, the prisoner, who once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of the mouse's love for music. You, readers, already know of some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to the princess. He would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle hearing music for the first time, outside the castle, in the gloom of the dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by the king's soldiers and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way back to the castle. And beside the soldier, there sat a young girl with ears that looked like nothing but more like pieces of cauliflower stuck to either side of her head. The girl's name, readers, was Miggery Sow, and though she did not know it, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. End of the second book.